The first time Romalie Caro saw Reese Dunmore, she knocked an entire arrangement of white peonies off the entrance hall console. And she was the one who had built it. She'd been adjusting the centerpiece, just half an inch, the kind of correction only she would notice. That's how she worked. It mattered. The morning light was hitting at a specific angle through the east windows, but she hadn't accounted for how brutal it would be, and when the front door opened, she startled. The vase went flying. He caught it. Barely. Water sloshing everywhere. A single stem hitting the stone floor. Reese handed it back without a word. Romalie took it without one. Then he was gone up the stairs, and she stood in the entrance hall of Dunmore Point with a vase of peonies pressed against her chest, feeling something she couldn't name. She'd been assessed. And she'd been found interesting against her will. She'd been warned about this, of course. He doesn't do small talk, Calla had said 3 months earlier, over the phone while Romalie was sketching centerpiece designs on graph paper. He'll be polite. Always polite. But don't expect warmth. I never expect warmth from clients' families, Romalie had answered. I bring the warmth. It's in the contract. He raised me, Calla had said, the way she always said it, not asking for sympathy, just stating a fact. After Mom's breakdown and Dad left, Reese was 24. I was 10. He just decided the whole thing was his responsibility, and he's been deciding things ever since. A pause. But he'll like you. He likes people who are prepared. I've done 212 weddings, Romalie had said. I'm prepared. She had not been prepared for the peonies. She set the vase back on the console, straightened the stems with hands that were mostly steady, and told herself it was just the light. The cliffside house caught the Atlantic sunrise at a specific angle through the east windows. She just hadn't accounted for it. She had a diagram that said otherwise. She put the diagram away. Dunmore Point sat at the end of a private road on the Maine coast. Stone and cedar and glass. The kind of house that had grown slowly over 3 generations and still looked like it was thinking about growing further. The wedding was Saturday. Today was Thursday. Romalie had come 2 days early because Calla's arrangements were the most intricate she'd ever designed. Late summer blooms mixed with early fall foliage, white and rust and deep amber. Just the main arch alone would take half of today to build. She was the florist. She had a job to do. The job did not include memorizing the exact angle of a man's jaw in early morning light. She picked up her shears and went back to work. He found Romalie in the side garden at 7 p.m., crouched over a bucket of dahlias, sorting by stem length with the focused attention most people reserved for surgery. You're the florist, Reese said. Romalie Chirot. She didn't look up. You're the brother who raised her. A silence landed between them. She felt its weight and stood, because meeting a pause from a crouch was bad positioning. Reese Dunmore was taller than she'd registered in the entrance hall that morning. The light off the water caught the gray at his temples and made it silver instead of tired. He'd changed clothes, a linen shirt, sleeves already rolled to the forearm. The kind of casual that cost money and effort and pretended it cost neither. His eyes were dark. A specific shade of dark she would later identify, in the privacy of her own head, as the Atlantic in November. Calla talks about you, Reese said. She talks about you more. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, the shadow of one passing through. Does she? Not a question. She said you'd be polite but not warm, Romalie said, wiping her hands on her apron. She was right about polite. He looked at her for a moment with the same expression she imagined he used on blueprints, searching for the structural load. The dahlias, he said finally. Are those for the terrace or the chapel? She blinked. Terrace. The chapel's getting afternoon shadow from the cypress row. Dahlias need morning light to open fully in time for the ceremony. Romalie pulled out her notebook, the one with every room's light conditions mapped by hour, and he watched her flip to the terrace page with an expression that was, for the first time, unguarded. You map the light, Reese said. I plan for everything. Most people plan for the wedding they want. He glanced at the notes, not reading them, just registering their existence. You're planning for the one you'll actually get. Romilly looked at him. He'd said it flatly, like a fact, not a compliment. That's what made it land. She put the notebook away. I've been doing this a long time, she said. The light always changes. Yes, Rhys said. It does. And he went back inside. Romilly stood in the side garden with her dahlias and a feeling she couldn't file under any professional category she owned. In the language of flowers, white peonies meant a bashful beginning. Something you hadn't meant to start. She told herself it was nothing. She had said that before. The rehearsal dinner was Thursday evening on the back terrace. Lanterns strung between old cedar posts, the sound of the surf rising from the cliff below. Romilly stayed in the background the way she always did. Checking arrangements, adjusting stems here and there, invisible in the way professionals are invisible when they're very good at what they do. She noticed the man arrive at 8:15 p.m. because he arrived wrong. Too smooth, too certain of his welcome in a house that wasn't his. Doyle Harwick was maybe 60, silver-haired in that deliberate way. The kind of man who wore his money on his handshake. He had an associate behind him and a leather portfolio under his arm. He greeted Rhys the way business partners greet each other at events where business isn't supposed to happen. Warmly, insistently, with a hand on the shoulder that was also a claim. Behind him, one step back, was a young woman who wasn't quite sure where to put herself. She was maybe 28. Dark hair, a dress that was beautiful and clearly chosen for an occasion she'd been briefed about but not fully explained. She looked at the terrace, the lanterns, the gathered family with the expression of someone who'd been told she was expected and was bracing to find out that wasn't quite true. Romilly recognized it immediately. She'd worn that same expression at other people's tables in other people's good years when she was younger, and still believed the invitations meant what they said. She found out the rest by accident. The way you find out things in old houses with high ceilings and the habit of carrying sound through them. She was in the library at 9 p.m., looking for the clippers she'd left there that afternoon, when Rhys's voice came through from the study next door. Low. Flat. With a specific quiet she'd already learned to read as controlled anger. I told you this weekend was off limits. Harwick's reply came smooth as poured cement. The Tidewater deal needs a face, Rhys. Philip Harwick has to believe you're building something here, not just buying coastline. Sybil coming this weekend, her being seen with you, it closes the gap. I never agreed to that. You agreed to the deal. The deal doesn't include my sister's wedding. A pause. Then Harwick's voice dropped to something almost fatherly. Which was worse. 2 years ago, when we were raising the Tidewater capital, I may have suggested to Philip, Sybil's grandfather, who controls the trust, that you and Sybil had an understanding. A social one. Nothing formal. Just the impression. The silence had a texture to it. Romilly stood very still among the bookshelves. You told them I was courting your daughter, Rhys said. I told them it was a natural fit. She's a remarkable young woman. Doyle, the trust releases Monday. If Sybil goes home from this weekend without the impression that she was welcomed as a guest of the family, Philip reads it as a slight. And the Tidewater capital disappears. Takes the next 18 months of the firm's project pipeline with it. A beat. 400 jobs, Rhys. Our people. Another silence. Get out of the study, Rhys said very quietly. I'll be civil this weekend. That's the full extent of what I'm agreeing to. Romilly was already 3 steps back toward the window when the library door opened. She had approximately 2 seconds to look like a woman who just found her clippers. She held them up when Harwick appeared. He assessed her in under a second, filed her under staff. More flowers, he said pleasantly. Always, she said pleasantly. He moved on. Romilly stood in the library with her clippers and the distinct sinking knowledge that whatever was happening in this house, it was going to reach Calla. And it was going to reach the man who'd caught her peonies that morning before they could fall. She found Rhys on the cliff path at 10 p.m., after the dinner guests had thinned and the lanterns burned low. He was standing at the railing with his back to the house, looking at the water in the dark below. She almost turned around. She didn't. You heard, he said without looking. Enough to know that the woman in the blue dress arrived here under a fiction she didn't write. And that your sister's weekend is being used as a business prop by a man who's very good at making that sound reasonable. He turned. He looked at her the way he had looked at the dahlia bucket. Not unkindly but without softness. Measuring what she could hold. I didn't build the fiction, he said. I know. I heard that part too. Romalie put her hands in her apron pockets. It still lands on Calla's wedding. And on my flowers. And on my best friend who trusted me to run this weekend clean. She met his eyes. What does Calla know? Nothing. Then it has to stay that way until after Saturday. That's what I intended. I know what you intended. You intended to handle it alone, the way you handle everything. She held his gaze. I'm telling you that this time you don't get to. I'll manage the young woman, seat her somewhere gracious, make her feel like an actual guest, keep her away from the fiction. You manage Harwick and you keep Calla luminous and unaware. We do this together. You don't hand me problems and walk away. You don't decide for me what I can carry. He was quiet for a long moment. The surf came up from below. Most people don't negotiate with me, he said. Most people haven't managed 212 weddings, Romalie said. I've dealt with harder rooms than this. Something moved in his face. Not the shadow of a smile this time, the whole thing. Brief, unguarded, gone. All right, he said. Together. In the language of flowers, yellow ranunculus meant charm. The kind that arrives before you've decided to allow it. Sybil Harwick was easy to like and difficult to deceive. When Romalie showed her to the guest suite in the East Wing, away from the family bedrooms, away from Reese's room on the second floor, Sybil sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her with eyes that were doing arithmetic. My grandfather told me Reese Dunmore invited me specifically, Sybil said. He may have believed that, Romalie said carefully. My father arranged this. Romalie was quiet for a moment. Then, I think you already know the shape of it. Sybil exhaled. Something in her shoulders settled. Not relief, but the release of a weight she'd been holding all evening. I spent 3 weeks choosing this dress, she said. It's a beautiful dress, Romalie said honestly. I don't want to be here under false pretenses. You're not, Romalie said. She sat across from Sybil on the window seat. Outside, the last of the rehearsal lights were going out on the terrace. Whatever story brought you here, I run this weekend. And I'm telling you that story is done. You're Sybil Harwick. You can stay and have a genuinely good time as exactly what you are, which is a guest. Or you can go home with your head high. Neither one costs you anything. Sybil was quiet for a long moment. He doesn't know I came here expecting something he never offered, does he? She asked. He figured it out the same way I did, Romalie said. Yes. Sybil nodded once. Good. She looked at the dress laid across the bed with a brief, wry expression. I'll stay. I actually like weddings. Genuinely. Not because of any Dunmore. Romalie laughed because it was exactly the right thing to say and went back to her flowers. He found Romalie in the barn they'd converted to a flower prep station at midnight, when the house was asleep and she was wiring corsages by the light of a clip lamp. You handled Sybil, Reese said, coming in quietly. She handled herself, Romalie said. I just told her the truth. That's unusual in my experience. Someone telling the truth without wanting something for it. She set down the corsage wire and looked at him. He was leaning against the barn door frame with his hands in his pockets and the Atlantic wind behind him. And for the first time his face wasn't managing anything. Just there. Just the full weight of a man who had been carrying things for 20 years and had briefly put them down. What did you give up, she asked, to raise Calla? He was quiet for a long moment. She didn't apologize for asking. 12 years at a firm in Boston, he said finally. Junior partner. Would have made full partner at 32. A pause. There was a woman. Claire. She wanted the version of me that didn't come with a 10-year-old sister, and a family estate that needed new plumbing and a mother who called every Sunday. He said it with no self-pity. Just the flat report of a man reading his own ledger. She left. I stayed. The plumbing got fixed. And Calla grew up. His voice softened around the edges on that last part. Graduated summa cum laude. She's marrying a man who makes her laugh on her worst days. She sends me photographs of things she thinks I'll like. A pause. I like that she does that. Romilly wound a piece of ribbon around a stem and said nothing. Because sometimes nothing is the right thing. My firm does well now, Rhys said. Mostly coastal development. Harwick's been my primary investor for 6 years. He looked at the barn ceiling. I kept telling myself the Tidewater deal was the last one that would feel like a compromise. Was it? Romilly asked. No. She had known the answer before he said it. You're very easy to tell things to, he said. He didn't sound surprised exactly. He sounded like a man who had found something he wasn't looking for, and didn't know yet what to do with it. I know what to do with hard things, Romilly said. I bring them into the room. I put them somewhere they fit. And I arrange what's around them. She looked at him. That's the whole job, really. Flowers and everything else. He came and sat on the stool across from her workbench. And they talked. Really talked. The kind of talking that forgets to ask permission. Until the clip lamp dimmed and the corsages were done and the barn smelled of greenery and salt air and something neither of them named. In the language of flowers, anemone meant anticipation. The feeling of something coming that you could not yet see. The morning of the wedding day, everything fell. It fell because Harwick's associate sent a draft agreement to the wrong email address. An easement for the Tidewater coastal development with a note attached that mentioned, in passing, that the Dunmore Point North Ridge was already earmarked. And the wrong email address was Calla's. Calla did not storm. She did not shout. She found Romilly in the chapel at 9 a.m., placing the final stems in the arch. She stood in the doorway with her phone in her hand, her face very still. Tell me what you know, Calla said. Romilly told her everything. She told her about the library wall and the cliff path and Sybil, and the deal she'd made with Rhys to keep the weekend intact. She told her all of it, including the part where she told herself it was purely professional. Including the part where Zara, her best friend and assistant, had cornered her in the cottage Friday morning with 2 cups of coffee, and the expression of a woman who missed nothing and loved her anyway. Don't tell me you're not in over your head, Zara had said. You smiled at the dahlia bucket this morning for no reason. Calla was quiet for a long time. You sat on this, she said finally. Both of you. Yes. Because you decided I couldn't hold it. Because we decided your wedding weekend shouldn't have to, Romilly said. Calla looked at the chapel arch. All the late summer blooms. The dahlias fully open in the morning light. Exactly as Romilly had planned them. Her face did something private and painful that passed quickly. He always does this, Calla said. Rhys. He builds a wall around whatever's wrong and stands in front of it so I never have to see it. A beat. I'm 31. I've been 31 for 4 months. I stopped needing him to do that. Another beat softer. I don't think he knows how to stop. I think he's starting to, Romilly said. Calla looked at her with the Dunmore expression, direct, unhurried, taking everything in. How long have you known him? She asked. Since Thursday morning. And you're already. Don't, Romilly said, her voice held. Calla was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not angry at you, Rom. I want to be. It would be easier. She folded her arms around herself. I'm going to go find my brother. Calla. I know what I need to say. She walked to the chapel door, stopped and turned back. The arch is the most beautiful thing you've ever built, Calla said. I know, Romilly said. I planned it that way. Calla almost smiled. Then she was gone. Harwick found Romilly an hour later on the east lawn. She understood within the first sentence that he'd decided she was the obstacle. It's admirable, he said, walking alongside her with his portfolio. How invested you become in the families you work for. The personal line can blur. She kept walking. I wonder, he continued pleasantly, whether your arrangement of this particular weekend has been entirely in service of the bride, or whether it's been in service of something closer to your own interest. He said it in the mild, reasonable tone of a man who knew exactly where the blade was going. She stopped. She set her buckets on the lawn. She turned and looked at him with the full, steady attention she reserved for structural problems in large floral installations. Mr. Harwick, she said, I know what a managed story looks like. And I know what it looks like when a man decides the woman in his way is the safest target. She picked up her buckets. You should go find Reese. He has something to tell you. What happened next, Romalie heard from Zara, who had been nearby with excellent timing. Reese had found Harwick first. He had done it in front of the caterers and 2 aunts and Calla's future mother-in-law, which Zara reported was not an accident. He told Harwick the Tidewater easement was off the table, that the north ridge of Dunmore Point was not for sale, not for development, not for use as a backdrop for any fiction, business, or social, that the consulting agreement between them was terminated as of that morning, and the paperwork would follow. He said it quietly, which was, everyone present agreed, somehow worse than shouting. And then Sybil Harwick walked out of the house in her good dress with her bag and stood at the terrace steps and said to her father in a voice that didn't shake even a little, You told grandfather that Reese Dunmore asked for me specifically. He didn't. You used me to make a deal look like a relationship. And when it didn't hold, you tried to make it the florist's fault. She picked up her bag. I'm going to the inn in town. Don't call me until you've thought carefully about what you'd like to say. And she walked down the terrace steps with her spine entirely straight. Romalie, arriving at the edge of the scene with her empty bucket, watched Doyle Harwick stand on the terrace of a house that was no longer any part of his business arrangements. She understood that some deals end not with negotiation, but with a 28-year-old woman refusing to be a prop any longer. In the language of flowers, red amaryllis meant determination, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. She sent Sybil flowers the following week. Red amaryllis. Felt right. The wedding was Saturday, and the arch was everything Romalie had planned it to be. The dahlias opened fully in the morning light. The chapel smelled of beeswax and late roses and the faint green breath of the hedges outside the window. Calla walked down the aisle in ivory silk, barefoot because she'd always hated shoes. The pale lavender sweet peas in her hair meant departure in the old language, which some people found sad at a wedding. Romalie had always found it exactly right. A departure from one life. The beginning of another. Reese stood at the front beside his soon-to-be brother-in-law in a suit the color of deep water, the collar open exactly one button. He did not watch the aisle for Calla first. He watched Romalie walk. She was carrying a small arrangement for the signing table, which was a perfectly legitimate reason to be walking ahead of the bridal party. She didn't look at him because she was a professional and professionals do not look for family when they're working. She looked anyway. He let her see exactly what was on his face. In a chapel full of people. Without putting anything over it. No management. No flatness. Just the full, unguarded Atlantic in November, right there in front of God and the 2 aunts and the caterers who had seen everything. She nearly walked into the end of the front pew. Then Calla appeared at the chapel door and everyone rose and Romalie took her place at the side and held the flowers and watched the Dunmores do the thing they were finally, haltingly, learning together. To let each other be grown. To love each other out loud. To stop standing in front of doors that didn't need guarding anymore. She found him after on the north path above the cliff. Not because she went looking. She had gone to check the reception lighting along the stone wall. The north path was simply where he was. Standing at the railing in the early evening with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled and the Atlantic going gold below. You watched me almost walk into the pew, she said. I did. It was unprofessional. From you or from me? Both. She came and stood beside him. The wind off the water was still warm. The last of the summer in it. Below them the reception was beginning. Music and the bright spill of voices carrying up from the terrace. Calla forgave us, Romalie said. Both of us. This morning before the ceremony. She said she'd be furious about it for years and consider it payment for every time we'd ever worried about her. He looked at the water. That sounds exactly like her. She also said, "You've been standing in front of the door so long you forgot you were allowed to walk through it." He was quiet. "She's not wrong," he said finally. "No." He turned toward her then, and there it was. The same face from the chapel. Everything still lifted. Nothing pulled back down. "I've known you since Thursday," Reese said. "I'm aware how that sounds." "I've known about you since Calla and I were 22, Romalie said. She talked about you the way people talk about weather. Thing that was just there. Reliable. Permanent. Occasionally overwhelming. She looked at the water. "I didn't fall for a stranger on a cliff path. I fell for someone I'd been hearing about for 12 years. And I was unprepared to find you interesting in person." He looked at her. "Interesting," he said. "That's the professional assessment. And the other one?" The wind moved through the hedges. Down below someone laughed. Full and bright and caring. "I knocked over a vase of peonies," Romalie said. "I have never knocked over a vase in 213 weddings. You caught it. And I've been filing that under logistics ever since. Because logistics is the only language I let myself want things in." She turned. "White peonies mean a bashful beginning in the flower language. I think about that language more than is practical." He was watching her with the full attention he had given the dahlia bucket. The light condition notes. Everything she'd said on the cliff path 2 nights ago. Like she would be on a test. Like the answers mattered specifically. "Tell me what forget-me-nots mean," he said. "True love." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I want to know what I'm handing you," he said, "before I hand it." And then because there had been enough careful distance in professional categories and managed pacing, she took the single step that closed the space between them and said, quietly and directly, the truest thing she had said all weekend. "Then hand it." He kissed her the way a man should. A man who has spent 20 years deciding things for other people. Who has finally decided something for himself. Careful and certain and with the full weight of someone who has stopped standing in front of the door. And simply walked through it. The Atlantic wind carried the reception music up from the terrace. Down below, Calla's laugh lifted above all the rest. Full bright knowing. She had been watching. Of course she had been watching. Romalie smiled against his mouth. He felt it. "She planned this," he said. "She planned the part where we'd end up on the cliff," Romalie agreed. "I planned the flowers and the light conditions and the dahlias. Obviously the dahlias." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "She didn't plan the peonies," Romalie said. "Neither did I," Reese said. "First thing in 6 years I didn't plan." They were married the following April in a garden on the Connecticut coast that Romalie had designed herself. And then, at the insistence of Calla and Zara, she handed the whole thing entirely over to another florist to execute while she stood in the bride's room, and let other people put flowers in her hair for once. "Hold still," said Zara, working a sprig of honeysuckle above Romalie's ear. "You're trying to direct the buttonhole arrangement through the window. I can see your eyes." "I'm not directing anything. You texted the florist twice. They had the wrong ranunculus." "Romalie." "Yellow, not cream." "It matters." Zara stepped back and looked at her in the mirror with the expression of someone who has loved a person through their worst professional habits. Who has made peace with every single one of them. "You're beautiful," Zara said. "Even when you're wrong about the ranunculus." Calla appeared in the doorway, 7 months along now. Radiant in the specific way of women who have decided that radiance is non-negotiable. She looked at them both and did a small private calculation that ended somewhere without any hurt in it at all. "He's already out there," Calla said. "He got there 40 minutes early." He stood by the arch and checked the flowers. A pause. "He took a photograph and sent it to me. No caption. Just the photograph." Romalie looked up. "That's how I knew," Calla said softly, "that you were the right one. Because he started noticing things. Because he started sending photographs." Her voice went quiet with something that wasn't sadness. Wasn't quite joy. But lived in the same house as both. He never did that before you. Outside, someone began to play strings. Something low and unhurried, warming up in the late morning light. The garden smelled of April honeysuckle and new grass. And somewhere in it, 43 years old and finally carrying something he had chosen to carry instead of something he had simply been handed, Rhys Dunmore was waiting by the arch. In the language of flowers, honeysuckle meant devoted affection. The kind that doesn't require a reason. The kind you build around. The way you build around light. Romalie went to meet him. She had planned for exactly this after all.